want to welcome everybody. We have a great crowd. As you know, tonight we'll be talking about LGBTQ plus, etc., and gender justice. What does it mean for us? And I'm sure you'll all agree that this is really an important and interesting topic. I also want to say, I really want to assure you that you do not need to worry about saying something wrong, or worry about asking the wrong question or showing what you think is your ignorance. We are all in the same boat here. And I mean that seriously. We're in particular in the same boat because we're members of AAUW. The backbone, the heart and soul of our organization is helping women and girls move forward and to identify and combat the sexism that can impede this process. So to Emily, as you know, she was born and raised in Ashland, as she states in her webpage, and I can attest, Emily has dedicated her career, indeed, I think her life almost, other than her family, to unearthing and dismantling the many ways gender justice harms us all. And I think we met in 2015. I'm not entirely sure, but you were most ably serving as the executive director of the Women's Foundation of Oregon. As a result of her work on the Equal Pay Act and numerous other projects, in 2017, she was chosen to receive the AAUW Oregon Breaking Barriers Award. Believe me, it was an award which was well-deserved. I also found out that she was named the Nonprofit Leader of the Year by the Center for Women's Leadership. Woohoo! Mm-hmm. So throughout the years, Emily has made, boo doodles, lots, great numbers, huge numbers of public appearances, given talks, and she's written a number of impressive and highly relevant articles. Right now, she's the principal in Emily Evans' consulting practice, which focuses on advancing gender justice and guiding intersectional change. So, Emily, take it away.
Yay! Thanks, Trish. It's been such a pleasure to be in community with AAUW over the past, probably my whole life, honestly. Both my mom and my gram, who are deeply inspirational to me, particularly my gram, who I love so dearly and took so much inspiration from. She has AAUW membership cards from way back, and was the dean of women and then the dean of students at SOU in Southern Oregon way back in the day. And it's just a delight to be here in community with y'all. Super meaningful to me. So this is meant to be a conversation. Please, I'm working with my 10-year-old on not interrupting people, but please interrupt. Just please interrupt. Just pop in with a question. Please ask anything. This is about learning and community together. This is about the work that is so important to me and I know is critical to y'all. So just pop in, have a question, pop it in the chat, anything that works well, and we'll get started here. I have 42 slides and listen, 52 minutes, so we're going to do great work. LGBTQIA 2S and gender justice. We'll get into all what that alphabet soup means in a minute, but let's talk about how we're going to move through the next 52 minutes together. We're going to talk a bit about grounding concepts, a bit about the anatomy of oppression and the way that it's interconnected, gender at the individual level, gender in society. We're going to have some great memes, terrific memes, I can promise. We're going to talk a bit about LGBTQ myths and facts, a little bit about gender and policy, and particularly its relevance here in Oregon in the next couple of years, and about LGBTQ allyship. All right, let's talk a bit about some founding definitions. And I know we love a definition. I know we love reading. Trish, my good friend, would you be willing to read this slide around gender justice for us?
Well, gender justice is inherently intersectional and therefore can only be achieved when all forms of oppression cease to exist. And gender justice would be a world where no one experiences any gender-based barriers to thriving.
I love that. I think there was a time where we would have defined gender justice as something related to a binary and about women getting the short end of the stick, which is certainly a big and important portion of it. And it is, in fact, a much broader concept, which we'll unpack together today. Thanks so much, Trish. Let's see. How about my friend Penny? Penny, are you willing to read to us a bit about intersectionality? It's been a minute, my friend.
Yes. Intersectionality, the concept that race, class, gender, and other individual characteristics intersect with one another to form unique and individualized experiences of oppression. The idea has been around since the 1800s, born out of the clashes between the feminist and the Black resistance movements. It began with a focus on race and gender specifically, but has expanded to include other social categories, for example, class, sexuality, and ability.
Intersectionality is really I have a whole nother presentation which we could talk about in terms of the shortcomings and harm that white feminism in particular has inflicted upon many, many folks that don't share the privilege that most of the white feminists have. And intersectionality, to me, is the deep antidote to that. It's the understanding that when you crosshatch gender disadvantage, sexism, patriarchy, etc., with other forms of oppression, that it compounds and exponentializes the experience of oppression. And that folks who hold privilege within a patriarchal system, which includes white women in particular, and particularly white heterosexual cis women, that is incumbent upon us to understand the intersectionality. And that's really the core of my practice. And I am so, so glad to be able to be here with folks who I know who are in community with me related to that.
Emily, what do you mean by cis women?
Yeah, we're going to get into that in a minute, but it means folks who do not identify as transgender or not trans folks. We are going to get into that in a hot minute. Okay, I feel like I've called on most of the folks who I know. So do I have, listen, in other groups, I know if I ask for a volunteer, there will be crickets, but in this group, I am ready to dive in. I am certain that somebody's going to be willing to read the definition of privilege. Come on.
How about Pat Lehman?
Yeah, go Pat.
Right. Okay. Privilege. The unearned and mostly unacknowledged societal advantage that a restricted group of people has over another group.
Absolutely. So this is things that we define as pretty arbitrary. I mean, in one world, we could call it eye color or handedness or any other type of privilege. Mostly in our world, we have it to do with race, to do with gender, to do with class. And it means that it's unearned and largely unacknowledged on an overt level advantage that a particular group that is in the in-group has over the out-group. That is privilege. All right, Trish, you want to help me call on another eager volunteer?
How about Wanda?
Okay.
Oh, Wanda.
Using the power or privilege granted by your identity to render a form of service or solidarity to an individual or group who holds less power or privilege.
I love this because it's fundamentally about leverage. I don't know if we have any physics folks, but or simple machine folks. It's about leveraging the privilege that you have based on any part of your identity to be in service or solidarity to a group who does not have access to that privilege. And the beauty of this is we can all do it. And we can all do it every day.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the gears. I don't know if y'all loved clip art in the late 90s or early 2000s as much as I did, but I love this gear analogy. I love the clip art, and we're totally going to go with it. So if we talk about the anatomy of oppression, we have a series of gears here, and it starts down at the bottom and we'll work our way up, and we'll give examples relative to the gender oppression, but particularly the queer and trans experience all the way up. So personal or self. This is the smallest gear. This is just what's rattling around in your own head. Your private beliefs, your prejudices, ideas that we have that include forms of internalized oppression or superiority or what have you. And that's just, a series of often unfortunate thoughts that are rattling around in your own head, particularly if you have a form of intersectional oppression or marginalization. So this might go, God, it really sucks that I don't have access to a bathroom where I can feel comfortable. I probably shouldn't go in that bathroom. I feel worried about it. People might misgender me. I'm not feeling great. And that's just my own experience rattling around in my own head. That's the smallest gear. And then we move up, and this is individual and interpersonal. This is what often folks think of oppression or bigotry or marginalization, the actual bits and pieces between people, conversations between people, biased speech and behaviors towards each other or towards stakeholders. These are things that happen on a day-to-day basis. So this is if I, get on a plane and I get misgendered, somebody uses the wrong pronouns for me, or I get somebody experiences a slur when they are just trying to buy their kids popsicles at the minute market or what have you. This is individual and interpersonal harm or hardship. Then we move up one level to the institutional or the organizational. These are the laws and the policies and the norms that perpetuate oppression at a structural level or an institutional level. So this is like, this is really boring, but for folks who are not married in certain states, but who are domestically partnered, if they get healthcare through their partner's healthcare, that's often taxed as imputed income. Anyway, it's boring and technical, but it means that those folks actually end up paying much more in their taxes simply because they're a queer couple and because they're domestic partners, as opposed to being a straight couple and married legally under the law. So that's an institutional, organizational form of oppression, hardship, marginalization. And then we move to the big bad, the really gruesome and omnipresent form, which is the big gear, the structural, the systemic, and the cultural. These are the values, the norms, the expectations, the ways of thinking and knowing and being that inform how we move through the world. All of us move through the world, whether we like it or not. So this includes things like, I never saw a movie that had a happy ending for a queer character until I was long graduated from college, right? Like it was, the queer movies were grim. Everybody died or died by suicide or got their kids taken away. There's something super sad, right? Like that's just a cultural message that your life was going to be misery if you were a queer person. And that's the big gear. But let me point out two important things about these gears. The first is that the mechanism works from the biggest gear down. No child is born ever feeling these feelings of oppression, this systemic cultural bigotry. That the smallest gear only ever gets influence from the biggest gear down. But in a beautifully hopeful measure, if you jam up any of these gears, starting with the self, it cranks up the whole mechanism. It messes up the entire structure of it, right? You can just jam in one little stick, starting with the self or the individual and the interpersonal, and that gums up the whole works, which is maybe the most hopeful message I have tonight, which is to say, if you start doing that good work, even rattling around between your own two ears, that starts to mess up the anatomy and the functionality of oppression. And bless everybody for being here at, what is this, 7:20 on a wintry Tuesday night to learn about how we can mess up that smallest gear and therefore start to turn the tide of oppression in a different direction. Okay, let's talk about gender at the individual level. this is really in the guts of it, y'all, and I'm so excited to have folks stay here with me. Okay, this is what the cis heteronormative white supremacist patriarchy tells you is true. That when you are born, or any baby on the planet is born, that there is a binary of biological sex assigned at birth. We call this sex assigned at birth. A beautiful poet and thinker and influencer called Alok Menon says that they call this genital hieroglyphics. This means that somebody somewhere, usually a medical practitioner, looks for about 2 seconds at the genitals of a newborn child and predicts an entire lifetime of thing based on those 2 seconds and their perception of their external genitalia. So you're going to tell you how that person identifies, how they dress, how they speak, how they walk, how much they're going to earn, who they marry, who they love, which is bananas. That's a bananas thing, right? That would be like you take 2 seconds of a look at some kiddo when they're born and tell them whether or not they're going to like tennis, whether they're going to be right-handed or left-handed, whether or not they're going to, be a Blazers fan. All these things that you're going to predict about them based on a momentary glance at their body when they're born. Which is bananas. There's no other place on earth that we do this. It's so silly. Okay, so this is the binary that we're told and we are groomed into. And this is what actually exists for all folks, the spectrum of gender and identity, these beautiful spectrums. We're going to unpack it all together, so don't worry about it. We'll take it bit by bit. This is what actually exists. 4 different vectors that are not a binary. There are, in fact, a spectrum. So it's a beautiful layer cake that has a spectrum within it. This is what the cis heteronormative white supremacist patriarchy tells us is true, and this is what is actually true, which is so much richer and so much more interesting and so much more beautiful. Okay, so let's talk about biological sex. This is sex assigned at birth. You might say, all right, listen, Emily, I'm here with you. I got it. I know there's a spectrum. I know there's other bits and pieces of things that really matter, but you can't tell me that there isn't some clear binary that happens with biology, that within the human body is really dictated by facts and science. To which I would say, bummer for you, because turns out you can have male genitalia or female genitalia, but there are at least 2% of babies born every year all over the world who are intersex, which means that their genitalia, if you look at them, are not easily categorized into male or female. They are some beautiful mix, and that's wonderful. And we're talking about millions and millions of people who have genitalia that cannot be easily categorized. So this is nature telling us, in fact, that it resists a binary and that it is, in fact, a spectrum. And there may be, evolutionary biologists, in fact, I'm sure there are among us who are saying, you know what, but genetics, okay, sure. Anatomy is anatomy, and there may be some, things that are not easily categorized within anatomy, but actually, let's just take a look at genetics. There's X, there's Y, there's XX, there's XY, and that's the end of it. Bummer also for you, because that's not the case either. Even within genetics, we know that just the presence of chromosomes are a beautiful mix. XXX, XYY, XXY, XO. There's all kinds of things, even within our DNA, that are resisting a binary. So no matter where we look, whether it's other organisms in nature, whether it's the form of anatomy and genitalia, whether it's literally the code that makes up our own being, we see it resisting a binary. So even if we try to be reductive, we have the beauty of nature telling us that that's not the case, even if we are coded to try to think of it that way. Again, pop in with questions. We are ready. Okay, next, so we're going down this layer cake. The next level is gender identity. First, we had biological sex. Now we're talking about gender identity. This is how you feel on the inside. This has nothing whatsoever to do with how you present on the outside, with how other people see you, with how whoever looked at your junk when you were born determined anything. This is entirely about how you feel in your own heart and your own mind. And this is on a spectrum from man to woman to anywhere in the beauty in between, transgender, genderqueer, non-binary. This is who you know yourself to be on the inside. And this is the first space where we start to see what we call the difference between being trans and being cis. So if we go back to these spectrums here, on this first spectrum of biological sex, most folks think of it as a binary, right? Male and female. And if on this first layer in our layer cake, your identity, who you know yourself to be on the inside, does not align with the sex you were assigned at birth, we call that trans. And my Latin folks will know that trans actually means across. It just means not straight down, not in alignment with what it was originally meant to be. So we see this here, that anything that is not straight up and down, we call that trans. And that is where the oppression and the marginalization starts to happen. We see that folks who are not in alignment, which is cis is also a Latin root, meant to be in alignment. So if you are assigned female at birth and you identify as a woman and your gender expression is feminine and you are heterosexual, which means you're attracted to men, that's all going to be in alignment. And that is all going to be cis. But at the moment at which you start to transgress, you start to go against what is expected of you based on your gender assigned at birth, that's what we call the trans experience. And that, first and foremost, is related to gender identity.
Emily, we have a question. If one says not non-binary, does that mean intersex?
It's a great question. So intersex is to do with biological sex. That's to do with the presentation of genitalia. So that means that if you look at someone's external genitalia, it's difficult to discern whether it's a penis, whether it's a vulva, and there are a million beautiful permutations within that. And that is how your genitalia appears. That's actually totally independent from your actual gender identity, which means that's how you know yourself. This has to do with how your genitalia look largely when you are born. This has to do with who you know you are in your own brain. This is about what other people think about you and assess you to be, largely when you're a child. And this is about who you know yourself to be over time. And this is a perfect question to illustrate the fact that what we've been told is that all of these things are linked. But what is true is that all of these are independent variables. None of them are related to each other. They are related because the patriarchy tells us they're related, and the patriarchy is trying to oppress us based on the alignment or misalignment of these various individual characteristics. These things are all independent. And that is the work of a lifetime to try to separate these variables from one another. What a great question. Okay, so we've done sex assigned at birth, we've done gender identity, and now we're going one layer cake down to gender expression. This is how you present yourself to others. This is how you walk, how you dress, how you talk, how you show up in the world, and the gendered stereotypes that traffic in those ways that you show up in the world. So the spectrum here is from masculine to feminine, and in the middle is androgynous or non-binary. And this is everything to do with how you present yourself to other folks. You know, this is the fact that like boys wear blue and girls wear pink, which is silly because in the Victorian era, that was totally backwards, but whatever. These are to do with gender norms of how we present ourselves to other folks. And again, this is entirely independent of the other components that we've been talking about. And next,
by the way, are these slides going to be available?
Absolutely. I'll send all these slides to everyone. Okay. Folks will have a chance to just marinate in them however much they like.
Great.
The next level is sexual orientation, which is who you are attracted to. And this can be broken down actually into multiple spectrums around who you're romantically attracted to, who you're physically attracted to. And the discerning among us might say, Emily, wait a minute, all these other slides have been about how you identify or how your body it looks or how your body is experienced. Why on earth would you throw in all of a sudden who you're attracted to? To which I would say, you're right. That's bananas. Why would we put that in together? That's ridiculous. Those things aren't related. Those things are independent variables. But we have been told and coached and punished into thinking that who you are attracted to is actually highly related to all the other components of your gender, which is a falsehood. So within here, we have heterosexual, we have gay and lesbian, we have bisexual, pansexual, asexual. We have just an enormity of spectrum around sexual orientation. And what a liberating idea. What a liberating idea that we could just be people in the world and be attracted to people who we like without hardship or oppression or having to be beholden to anything. I am mindful of time, Trisha, mindful of time. Okay, so here we have, this is actually a lovely little exercise if you want to do it and map your own self. So we have your biological sex. This is actually my map. This is my map. So biological sex, our sex assigned at birth. I was assigned female at birth. And then we go down to gender identity, who I know myself to be on the inside, and I'm a woman on the inside. And that's great for me, and that feels great. And I don't experience the oppression of having a trans experience, which means all of a sudden you start to cross what you were assigned at birth. And it's not in alignment, which means cis, of what is expected of you based on that genital hieroglyphics. But then, for me, here I come with gender expression. I'm pretty on the mask side, right? And that's the moment where oppression and marginalization starts to happen, right? Like, and sometimes that's silly. Like sometimes that's like just like a silly, boring, mundane thing. Like for instance, my wife and I were going to Mexico, where she's from, for a holiday, and I didn't have any of my shorts, and they were lost somewhere in the garage, and nobody could find them. And she was like, "Whatever, we'll just pick you up some shorts on the way." And I was like, "Babe, that doesn't work for me. I'm in a horrible no man's land between boys and men's sizes. So there's nothing it's not just easy for me to go to a regular store and pick up clothes, right? Which is dumb and boring, but that's actually an expression that was tough, you know? Or it's silly. Like we were coming back from that same vacation, and the TSA guy goes, my wife hands him our passports, and there's my son and my daughter, and I'm the taller one at this point, and the TSA guy goes, "Ma'am, I'm missing your older boy's passport." To my wife, which my son thought was hysterical, right? Like the TSA guy thought that I was her son, and that's funny. Like I thought that was funny, right? And that's, that's fine. And then, the other day I was walking down by the riverfront, just walking my dog, and I had someone say, "I'm gonna kill you, you fucking lady faggot. I'm gonna fucking kill you." So it ranges from being inconvenient that you can't find the shorts you want to find, to being funny, getting misgendered with your family, to being really scared, just trying to walk your dog by the riverfront, So that moment when you start to deviate can mean a whole host of things for folks. And then this last piece, which, as the discerning among us rightly said, has nothing to do with anything that happened before it, is related to sexual orientation. And here I am, real gay about it. So this is my map. And I so encourage folks to think about where your map is and what you've experienced related to that. Even if your map is in complete alignment with what you were assigned at birth, there's a whole host of things that go along with that for you. And it's important to interrogate that on a personal level and an interpersonal level. Cultural level. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the difference between patriarchy, sexism, and misogyny. So patriarchy is the unequal allocation of power between cis men, as we know, who are in alignment all the way down with what's expected, and all other genders. Anybody who's not a cis heterosexual man is experiencing the unequal allocation of power. I'll get to the toilet paper and the tampons in a minute. I know you're interested. Sexism is all the ways that unequal power manifests, all the ways that it's shown, which is to say, have you ever been to a public space, or in particular a workplace, where it hasn't been free, depending on whether or not the toilet paper's out, but generally it's considered important to provide people the means by which to take care of fluids that are involuntarily coming out of their body. Am I right? Right? Like it's expected when you go to a workplace that you will have toilet paper. But you know what's not expected in a workplace? That you will have free access to period hygiene, right? That's something that you have to pay for. I remember those janky machines in high school, in middle school, that you had to pay for, right? There's a fluid involuntarily coming out of your body and you have to pay for it versus it being freely supplied to you, right? So that's a ridiculous, but also really poignant example of one of the ways in which that unequal power manifests. And misogyny is an individual action or policy that polices or upholds both. So that's the things that we experience on an individual level that uphold that. So that's somebody saying, no, we're going to continue to charge 25 cents for a tampon. We're going to continue to shame women and make it difficult for them to take care of their own bodies in the workplace or in school. All right, now we get to meme territory. God, I love this so much. This is the most anatomically horrifying and amazing example of homophobia and heteronormativity that maybe I've ever seen. So someone was so concerned when they created this image that they would think these two skeletons were queer that they put bone boobs on this gal on the right. They put bone boobs. They defied anatomy in like some so horrible ways just because they were so concerned that folks would interpret these skeletons as queer. I just love it and hate it so much. It's terrific, right? This is like the effort that folks had to go through to put those bone boobs on there. Okay. We're coming off the holidays. Did anybody do Elf on a Shelf with their kiddos or their grandkiddos? We love Elf on a Shelf here in our family. So this is a derivative of that. Hopefully folks love Harry Potter, but not J.K. Rowling. So you've heard of Elf on a Shelf, but have you heard of a Smurf on a TERF? And TERF stands for Trans-Exclusive Radical Feminists. And this means folks that have the heart of a feminist, but they don't understand the fact that patriarchy, misogyny, sexism apply to everyone who is not a cis man. They are excluding trans folks from the importance of understanding that gender injustice impacts them the most. And actually, I'm going to stop the screen share for a minute to tell y'all about this, because it's deeply intertwined with my college experience. I know folks here, we loved our college experience, right? That's why we're members of AAUW, right? That college was incredibly important to us. I went to Bryn Mawr, which is a women's college on the East Coast, and it was one of the foundational experiences of my life. I got to be with extraordinary women, with brilliant women, and we had a T-shirt that said, Bryn Mawr, where the women are women and the men are scared. and it was right, and it was good. And that fact that it was a sacred space for women to be together and to learn together was so important to me. And y'all, it took me longer than I'm proud to admit to understand that trans folks, trans men, trans women, non-binary folks, genderqueer folks needed to be in that space too. And I had the wrong end of the stick on that for the better part of 10 years, and I am not proud of it. And my learning took too long. And what finally changed my mind is one of the most brilliant women I've ever known, who said, Emily, why was Bryn Mawr created in 1885? It was created because folks who were boxed out of higher education in this country needed a place that was just for them. Folks that were discriminated because of their gender needed a place to learn in community with one another. And in 1885, our best understanding was cis women, was women who were assigned female at birth, who identified as women, who presented as women, and that was our best understanding. And our best understanding of that has changed. Our best understanding of that now is anybody who is harmed by this bullshit, patriarchal, sexist, binary construct of gender. And the folks who are on the tip of the spear of the most harm are our trans and non-binary brothers and sisters and folks. They're the ones who are most harmed and most boxed out. And they're the ones who deserve the most love and the most centering, and whose places in these sacred places where we have carved out and said patriarchy doesn't belong here, that's where those folks deserve to be centered the most. And y'all, I had the wrong end of the stick on that for a long, long time.
Emily, I have someone who's asked a question that may sort of relate to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's one of our members. My second cousin was born a boy. At the age of 21, he transitioned to a woman with surgery and hormone treatment. Recently, she married a man. So how would you categorize that? And also with respect to the example that you just gave, what changed your mind? So
yeah,
I'll toss those both to you.
Yeah. I'll start with the first. What changed my mind was really the story I just told, somebody being like, what was the core of what started this institution? This institution was about who had been boxed out and who had been boxed out the most. And if you look at what state legislatures across this country are currently attacking, right? They were attacking women. I mean, they still attack women, please, let's be real. But the disproportionate amount of attacks on trans people, what bathroom they can use, where they can go to school, what sports teams they can play on, what access to healthcare they have, right? That is wildly disproportionately attacking trans folks based on gender, right? Which is the same reason that women couldn't access higher education, which is why women who went to Yale, which wasn't, by the way, co-ed until the 70s, had to shower in the basement, even though their dorm rooms were on the 4th floor, because men couldn't possibly share the john with gals, right? Like these were the things. It's all based on gender. And if you interrogate your understanding of gender, you have to come to the eventual conclusion that the folks among us who are most disproportionately harmed by that are our trans and non-binary friends and brothers and sisters and siblings. So that's what changed my mind. It was so uncomfortable, but when I took stock of what my actual gender analysis was telling me, there was no way I couldn't apply that same standard. So the question about identity of someone who was assigned something at birth and then came out and then married someone of a particular gender, that is entirely about the independent variables of the spectrums we looked at, right? Those things are not related. And we think they are. We've been told that they are. Your gender assigned at birth, your gender expression, your sexuality. But those things are all independent, which means you could be assigned one gender at birth and have a different gender identity and have a totally different sexuality. And that's all fine. And that's super confusing for everybody who's trying to deprogram the programming that we've been given. But that's a question that's fundamentally about all of those spectrums being independent. Anybody can fall anywhere on them. And that's confusing. That's confusing for us. And we have to have compassion for ourselves, particularly if we've known and loved somebody with a particular gender identity or a particular gender expression or a particular sexual orientation, or we have some expectation of how they might show up, right? That's something that can be tough, and there's grieving to do with that.
And I'm gonna do something. Hopefully this is okay. I want to just hop in, take the privilege of making an editorial comment. you were talking about gender and the injustices and so on, and the current day and age that we're unfortunately seeing. I am not here to say racism doesn't exist. But believe me, that's, part of what, I'm all about, being the chair here. But on some level, I almost feel like people have this emotional reaction deeper when we're talking about these issues. I don't know, maybe I'm off base here, but it just seems to, wow, it's like, oh, we got to do this. No, we can't do that. Kind of just deep, reflexive, don't go anywhere else reaction. So anyway, I don't know how you feel about
more threatening is what it is. It's more threatening to us cis folk to see that, because how did they get there? Maybe we really should get there. Who knows? I think it's just very threatening to us.
Yeah, maybe it's contagious, Marty. Anyway,
Oh God, maybe so.
God forbid, God forbid. Anyway, yeah. What do you say about that, Emily? In terms of,
I love that point, and I love Marty's point, which is to say that it's super threatening. I think that we have accept the dignity and the honor and the reality of trans and non-binary folks in particular. Everything to do with the patriarchy comes crumbling down. Everything it's ever told us has to be false, right? These boxes you have to fit in, these identities you have to hold or not hold, all of that comes crumbling down when we say, actually, your sex assigned at birth, your gender expression, your gender identity, and your sexuality are totally sovereign from one another. And we can love and embrace everybody, no matter where they fall in those independent spectrums.
But I think, go ahead.
No, then the patriarchy, what it has told us, and the oppression that is enacted on those who are not cis heterosexual men, then starts to crumble.
Well, I don't think that most of us understand it. And I think that's what makes it so threatening. We can't figure out why our third son has decided all of a sudden that he is, theoretically all of a sudden, that he is really wanting to be a woman, or that he really wants to be with men, or whatever the heck it is, and I've inherited a lot in that in my family very recently, and it's very interesting, and it's very difficult because I don't know the folks well enough to really talk to them about it, because I think that they're going to think I'm maybe criticizing them or just patronizing them or something, so I don't say anything.
Right. Which is its own form of harm, because if we're coming from a place of curiosity and love and wanting to understand, right, that there's such a beauty in those conversations, and we all are swimming in these waters. I have a few slides in a moment that are, this is colonization. There are indigenous communities all over the planet where queer and trans folks were held in incredibly high regard.
That's right.
They were seen as special, as holding an important and central place in the community. They were loved. I remember my mom did a lot of work with the indigenous and native community in Southern Oregon, and I remember when I was in high school and she started to tell me about Two-Spirit folks and the indigenizing sexuality and love, and I remember thinking, oh my God, there are communities where these folks not only are not seen as lesser, they're seen as important.
Mm-hmm.
That was mind-blowing to my 15-year-old self, right? And that was around the world, except for a few, bigoted shitheads in Western Europe who've created a world in which none of us are really care to live right now. that crafted a space that made it very difficult for us to think outside these binaries. And that is the work. Marty, it's tough. It's super tough. Kids, grandkids, nieces and nephews, people that we love and we had this conception of, telling us that they're not who we thought they were. And there's grieving to do with that. And there's unlearning, and it's messy, and we're not going to get it right. and I got it wrong, and I still get it wrong. I have a beloved co-trainer who's trans and non-binary, and I misgendered them like at least for 6 months straight. And you're like, I do this stuff for a living. Like, nobody gets to be proud about how perfectly they do this, because nobody does.
Well, Emily, we had another question. Is this all happening because we just don't have enough words? I mean, it seems to me you were trying to add some words and make some distinctions, but is the problem that we just don't have enough words?
No, I mean, yes, and I think the problem is that we've constructed language to invisibilize this community. My wife is from Mexico, and I was just talking with my kiddo about, every noun in Spanish has a gender, right? There's actually no way to even convey, a fork or a or a blanket in a genderless way, So language is also a tool of colonization. Language is also a form of oppression that crafts our experience of the world. So the fact that we don't have language for it is not so much the impediment. It's the tool, right? That's not just like a neutral thing that happened. That's the point. Language resists this multiplicity, this plurality of life, right? The language itself is very clumsy. When we talk about abortion, we often talk about, women, it's a woman's choice, and it is, and it's anybody who can get pregnant's choice, which is a clumsy fucking phrase, right? Like, they, them is kind of clumsy. We don't like it. It's fussy. It sounds wrong, and it's language itself resisting the freedom that comes from being emancipated from these gender binaries. So language is, I think, in some ways the impediment, but it is also the tool of colonization and the tool of bigotry that is forcing this binary upon us. And we can resist that. We can choose to resist that. We can choose to say, hey, y'all, hey, folks, hey, students, hey, parents, instead of boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. We can choose. We can choose the language, even if it's clumsy, or even if we don't love it, even if it's not what we're used to.
Well, I think there's another question about, is this where putting preferred pronouns in your name tag or Zoom box can help? Can that help?
It totally can. And you know what? That's important in and of itself. And even more importantly, it's a signal. It's a signal that you give a shit, right? Even if you get it wrong, it's a signal that you care and that you see someone whose pronouns might not be in alignment with what you expect of them based on their presentation or their name or whatever, right? Like, it's a signal. And that is so incredibly powerful, right? Like, if you saw someone wearing an AAUW pin walking down the street or at a restaurant, you would know that you had some shared values in common, right? Right? Or someone went to your alma mater, or someone who had a kiddo who went to your kiddo's high school. There's some camaraderie there. So it's really about signaling that you give a shit. And that's so much more important than the actual mechanics of the pronoun or getting the pronoun right, Actually, Trish, would it be helpful? I have a little thing about allyship that I can share that shows a couple of important things.
Yeah, I think that's really good, because someone was talking about how do we teach kindness? Is there a letter for a heterosexual?
Is there a letter for not being a bigoted piece of shit? All right, I have a bunch of myths in here that are actually really helpful to understand. And here we have, these are really common microaggressions. So things that actually do the opposite of pronouns are things that do quite a bit of harm. Even if it's just little pieces of harm chipping away at somebody: misgendering, misnaming, incorrect pronouns, asking intrusive questions. Who's the man in this relationship, or who's the wife? Referencing LGBTQ family members. Oh, don't worry, my aunt is gay, which, again, well intended, is really meant to other folks in some ways, perpetuating harmful myths or stereotypes. Except for Cher, we all love Cher. Every queer person loves you. I'm kidding, but also we really do. Using terms or labels that are only for queer folks to use. I have a very loving story where my dad, who is just like a tremendous ally, wonderful guy, and at one point was like, "Oh, like she's a big dyke like you," and I was like, "Dad, that's not a word. That's not a word that you get to use." And he was like, "That felt weird when I said it," and I was like, "Good, let's not use that word again. That's my word to use. That's not your word to use." Mimicking or copying affects or mannerisms, homophobic jokes or language or metaphors, interrupting, dismissing, ignoring, plagiarizing queer folks, which happens an awful lot. Okay. This is an important political reality to understand. This is actually from 2023, and that's not including 2024, which is upon us. This is the number of states targeting transgender healthcare in recent years. So this is bills banning or restricting transgender healthcare. Look at this explosion, y'all. It's wild. It's wild. The exponential increase. I have no doubt 45 to 50 states will be introducing transgender targeting healthcare within this current legislative session. This is just 2021, and it has gotten so much worse since then. States that have enacted curriculum censorship or hostile school climates, states that passed but then vetoed it, or any introduced bills, the whole country will be red, unfortunately, when it comes to this. So this is a clear and present danger. And it is not only women, cis women, women assigned at birth, and their bodily autonomy, their educational autonomy, everything that we as AAUW women stand for and care about. This is actively targeting our trans and non-binary and genderqueer folks that are experiencing just the 21st century of what cis women experienced in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century.
And I also think, Emily, a lot of people look at transgender healthcare as the surgeon. We're going to go operate right away. I mean, that is such a misunderstanding of the breadth of what transgender healthcare really is, what needs to be done before the surgeon comes on the scene, whether that's even in the cards, anyway.
Yes, no, 100%, Trish. So on my myths, which we don't have time to get to, but being trans means having surgery. Absolutely not. Being trans, all that being trans means, right, is that your sex assigned at birth is different from your gender identity. That's it. That's all that being trans means. It doesn't mean that you use any particular pronoun. It doesn't mean that you dress any particular way. It doesn't mean that you show up any particular way. It doesn't mean that you have any type of medical treatment. It doesn't mean anything other than that the sex you were assigned at birth is not congruent with the expectations of your gender identity. And that is it. And that is all you need to prove your transness. And lots and lots of trans folks decide to have hormone therapy, decide to present themselves differently, decide to change their name or their pronouns or to have surgery. And that's wonderful. And those are all things that are available to them. But that does not define transness. Similarly, there's another myth that trans kids and youth are routinely receiving irreversible medical treatment prior to age 18. That is not true. It is incredibly difficult to receive gender-affirming care even above the age of 18. There's a 4-year waiting list at OHSU to receive gender-affirming care on the Oregon Health Plan. It takes an extraordinary amount of just effort to get gender-affirming actual medical care. And the fact that young folks are they're not receiving gender-affirming care for a kiddo can be using their correct pronouns. It can be letting them wear clothes that feel good to them and their body. It can be letting them use the restrooms that feel right to them. It can be letting them play on a sports team, even if they're mediocre, which most trans kids are, like the rest of us. It's about, that's what gender affirming care is. The likelihood that folks are experiencing irreversible medical treatment is just not a thing. It just doesn't exist. It's like voter fraud. It's a gorgon of the right that has been created and has no basis in actual fact.
Emily, can you zip through most of your myths? I know time is flying. We've had great comments from people.
Yeah, totally.
Really, and don't forget allyship, but I'd love to see all your myths.
Yeah. So this is number 9. Gender affirming medical care was created by and for trans folks. Ha. This is ridiculous. Every bit of gender affirming care was actually created for cis straight folks. So electrolysis, breast reduction, breast augmentation, hysterectomies, anything to do with hair, vocal feminization, like everything to do with how we alter our bodies to be more gender conforming started with cis straight folks who wanted to manipulate your bodies. And you know what? I'm here for bodily autonomy. I am here for it, but I am not here for folks having access to things like electrolysis or breast augmentation or hysterectomy when it is a medical necessity or even a cosmetic preference, but being denied to trans folks because it has to do with their gender identity and not because it has to do with their cosmetic preference. So gender affirming medical care was created by and for cis straight folks, and we are systemically denying it to trans folks because it's actually a part of their core identity and not because of something cosmetic that they're interested in. All right, I'm going to go back here. Also mindful of time, I would just love to hear from folks. If anybody needs to pop off, would be so delighted to engage with folks after the fact. Humans are the only living things that engage in queer behavior. Most of the natural world is queer AF. Birds and slugs and fish and flowers. It's actually the anomaly to have a gender binary in nature. To have like just strictly male physical characteristics and behavior and female characteristics and behavior is actually the minority in the natural world. Which is wild, right? Because we're told that this is like unnatural or against nature. Silly and wrong. Any biologist will tell you. People choose to be queer or trans. The vast majority of folks feel that they experience their identity as something that is inherent to them and that is not something that is a voluntary choice in one way or another. This is an important one, especially when it comes to, right-wing folks who are attacking queer and trans folks, that queer folks are perpetrators of abuse, or people become queer or trans or come out as queer or trans because they were abused. 95% of folks who choose to perpetrate abuse, particularly against minors, are cis heterosexual men. And that's largely because that abuse of minors mostly has to do with power and access. So when you think about, and 90% of them, again, are cis heterosexual men. So it's about who has access, particularly to young children. And it's often cis heterosexual men who have access to young men or boys. And that is entirely about power and access and has nothing to do with sexuality. So this is how we protect our young folks and who we think is safe to be around our young folks, and has absolutely nothing to do with sexuality or with gender identity or expression. This is a good one. Most queer folks are ashamed of their identity and don't want to be asked about it. Actually, most queer folks just don't want to be perpetrated or harmed based on it. Most queer folks are happy to chat about it or happy to disclose things about their identity so long as it's respectfully asked and carefully honored. That's not a big deal. We see this in healthcare scenarios a lot. I do a lot of trainings for healthcare folks or human services folks who are wanting to attend to queer and trans folks. And they're like, oh, but I don't want to ask. And I'm like, actually, if you're not out to get anybody, we're fine. We're happy to tell you that we have wives and kids and partners and loved ones and what our pronouns are. And that's fine. If you're coming from a place of appreciative inquiry, we got it. Don't worry about it. This is the last myth that we haven't covered yet. That queer folks live lives of marginalization, disease, misery, and rejection. And this is not to say that queer and trans folks don't experience hardship. Of course we do. And we do disproportionately. And we live lives of beauty and contribution and resilience and joy and magic. So that part is wonderful too. When you think about oppressed communities, we don't always want to think about the hardship and the turmoil and the bigotry. We also want to think about the beauty and the joy and the resilience and all the contributions that they're making to our communities. Okay, I know I'm super mindful of time. These are some ways that we can show up in allyship. So pronouns are great. Pronouns are so great, and they're great in and of themselves, and they're great as a signal that you give a shit. And these are other ways to start to unpack those spectrums, start to unbraid them from one another in your mind, which is in my mind, the best and most important gender justice work we can do in our lifetimes. So fostering empathy, understanding that if you are a cis straight person, you probably won't ever have to worry about what bathroom you use. You won't have to worry about your right to marry the person you love being taken away by a Supreme Court decision. You won't have to worry about your kid being able to get the health care that they need and deserve based on their gender identity. So just understanding the hardship and trying to connect with that. Leveling up your analysis. All of you are here again, 8 p.m. on a wintry night to learn more. And that's such an incredible example of being willing to try to expand how you understand gender and how you show up for others in your. This is minding your language. This is not just pronouns. This is about saying y'all instead of ladies and gentlemen. This is about saying, hey, where's your grown up to your kiddo, as opposed to saying, where's your mom or where's your dad? This is about divesting from stereotypes. It's just being mindful. And again, it's not that we're not going to get it all right all the time, but if you can de-gender and de-stereotype your language, so much the better. Audit listening and improving. Actually being like, hey, you know what? For our local AAUW chapter, how was the experience for our queer women? How is the experience for our parents of queer kiddos? Hey, let's hear about it. And if there are things to learn, if there are ways that we fell short, let's listen and let's strive to improve them. Let's listen with an open heart. So being deeply curious about the experience of anybody who experiences marginalization or oppression. Taking a good look at policies and practices. I have no idea what AAUW national stance is on gender inclusion, but I would go so far as to venture that anybody who's not a cis man should belong at the table of AAUW. I think that anybody who's experienced gender oppression in an educational context belongs here, because that's the original heart of our mission. And that's beautiful. And that's an example of the practices and policies that we're trying to overturn based on this, honestly, real bullshit understanding of gender. And then the last is to vote and buy, attend, and consume with attention and intention. It took me a while. I don't know if anybody's on like a social media cleanse, but getting rid of things that don't make you feel good and intentionally following queer and trans folks. I love Alok Menon. Kate McKinnon is incredible. There's so many amazing queer and trans thinkers and influencers. It's like, just think about what you digest on a daily basis, where you shop, where you spend your money, where you spend your time, what you're listening to and reading and paying attention to. And just thinking, all right, I'm going to read at least 2 books by a queer or trans author this year, or I'm going to watch a documentary about trans experience, or a family with a trans kiddo. Those are the sort of micro things that we ingest every day that can really transform our analysis and our empathy about the world.
That's just amazing. I don't want to precipitously cut you off. We've hit about an hour. This has been a lot of information. I don't know about the other folks here, but it's been very valuable. And I'm going to have to, think about all this and feel about all this. We could, have a brief chat, or, do breakout rooms. I think, my vote is, there's so much to have taken on here. I don't think there's a one of us that hasn't learned something or wants to know something more about. Then in a sense, it's almost superfluous to have a chat about what have we learned. This might be a good time to, to call it an end. Emily, what do you think?
Totally. And I just, I love this group, and my heart is here, and my family heritage is here, and I am just so willing to come back and chat. I have so much more material here. I have colleagues who would love to come and chat more. I have a gender map exercise that we do with kiddos, even as young as preschool, that is really elucidating and heartfelt. So, and I'll send along a glossary, the slides, quite a few other things that might be helpful to folks on their journey as we're trying to unpack this all together. Like, there's so many small ways that we can show up in solidarity, and so many ways that we can workshop together. After this basic info, we're all learners. There are good, smart, kind people who can and do disagree about how we manifest these values in our daily life, and I am here for those conversations.
Well, I see, hang on, Marty. I see a lot of enthusiasm, which I share, about having you come back. I will see what I can do. I do know, and I can just, because I know many of these women, I can just tell how attentive they've been, really how profoundly they appreciate you and the work you do, and that you've come to speak to us. I just want to make sure before anything happens that I join in all the chat folks who are saying thank you, thank you, thank you. But anyway, Marty, you had something.
Well, I was going to say, I think it would be great if we, got to digest this, got to discuss it with other people, and give them the opportunity to see the video. And then I think we should have another session. This was really excellent. And I think that there's a lot more to share here. And this is such a current topic. And I think, and it's a change from just talking about BIPOC people. No offense, but it's the other, I think it would be really excellent to go on with this. You hit upon something, Trish.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Well, I knew Emily would be a home run. So look, Emily, and thank you everyone for coming. It really feels good that we're together, thinking and feeling and searching. So anyway, I'll see what I can do about another session.
Yeah.
Okay, take care.
I
Bye-bye.
love that. I'll
Thanks,
send out
Emily.
an eval to folks and resources. So good to be here with y'all.